The following podcast is intended for ages 13 plus for usage of high vocabulary terms related to literary analysis, biology, chipmunk deep fandom knowledge, and the filmmakers whose names kids skip over in the credits. You have been warned. Kappa. You hear me? Joking aside, though, my analysis of this podcast's subject matter is done in a way that kids will likely find uninteresting, even if the film itself is, as will become evident from the lingo I start using in a few moments. Hello, Chipmunk and Chipette fans, and to celebrate Alvin and the Chipmunks the Squeakuel turning 10 years old today, yeah, it's been that long, I thought it'd be a good idea to give a retrospective on the film and explain the effect that it has had on me, and surely a lot of other fans, and for better or worse, how it has aged in all that time. If you guys want, I can turn this into a series, so let me know if you want me to do this with any other particular Chipmunk movie or cartoon series. Before I begin talking about the Squeakuel, I want to make something very clear. This podcast is meant for any Alvin and the Chipmunks fan, but I assume this one is more likely to attract those who grew up on the live-action film Chipmunk universe, let's just call it the Chipmunk movieverse, and base a lot of your knowledge of the franchise on it. I'm not going to discriminate if you haven't seen the older generations or don't care about what came before, or even if you think the movieverse Chipmunks are the greatest thing since sliced bread. And you don't necessarily have to know what the heck a Bagdasarian is. I'm not asking you to have prior knowledge of that. Good if you do, but just as long as we keep our opinions respectful, we can hopefully have a very constructive discussion in the comments. Although, if you didn't know that the Chipmunks have existed before the movies, going back over 6 decades now, you should really get out more. Now, I'm going to be 100% completely honest with you. I was, to an extent, introduced to a lot of Alvin and the Chipmunks lore from the movieverse. My true introduction to the franchise, however, was from listening to the original Chipmunk song on the radio for the first few Christmases of my life whenever my family would travel downstate to visit relatives. That's how I got to know the original 3 characters, but the Chipettes I had never heard of prior to the Squeakuel. Though after seeing the trailer, my mom told me that she remembered them from the Alvin and the Chipmunks cartoon that she grew up with in the 1980s. But I didn't get around to seeing what they were like in that time period until much later. The first impression I got from the Chipettes was probably the same as the general public and anyone who was first introduced to them from the Squeakuel like I was. Girl chipmunks that look and act like each of the Seville brothers and are meant to be their love interests. I can talk about how the Chipettes have kind of broken out of that stereotype over the years in other videos, but for now, let's just talk about how they are handled as characters in the Squeakuel. Janice Carmen, who created the original version of the Chipettes, had some influence in the writing of this film to make sure their introduction to the movieverse was how she wanted it to be. Personality-wise, each of the Chipettes are kept very similar to their older incarnation, but in the case of Jeanette and Eleanor, they do get their own little moments of character growth in the film. With Jeanette, it's self-confidence. It's not the clearest transition in my opinion, but it is evident from the scene where she takes a big risk and jumps off of a toy helicopter to grab the remote for it, only being held onto by her ankle. Right after she grabs it, she's just sheerly astonished by the fact that she was able to do it, and compare that to the earlier scene where she was too nervous to go through the mail slot at the penthouse. I know, different stakes, not the best circumstances to compare, but it is development nonetheless. For Eleanor, it's when she decides to throw away her platform shoes to show Ian that she isn't subject to how other people think she should look or what they think she needs in order to be the successful singer that she wants to be. But in Brittany's case, she doesn't develop as much, at least from the way it seems to me watching the film now as an adult, but she is a good role model. She's really good at motivating her sisters, and like her 80s incarnation, she shows a lot of leadership qualities. The moment that I think defines her character is when she refuses to perform without Jeanette and Eleanor. She would rather do what she loves with those who she loves than becoming a superstar alone. And this plays into the overall message of the film, which I will get back to later. To wrap up discussion about the Chipettes, I'll just run through a few more notable things about their role in the lore of the Squeakuel and the long-term effects that their introduction has had. Considering what they accomplished in later films, maybe not so much in Road Chip, their addition really did expand the movieverse, although probably not by much. At least we know a female variety of Neo-Tamias Disastrous exists. I still wish we could have heard more about their origin story, like Brittany tried to explain to Ian before he interrupted her. The movieverse Chipettes really deserved a spin-off film in my opinion, even though we'll never get it, sorry to crush your dreams again, but I'll save that missed opportunity for another elaboration video. Another thing accomplished for the Squeakuel by the Chipettes was the numbers at the box office. The reason why it made almost $100 million more than the first one was, as statistics have shown with other franchises, expanding the demographic to more female audience members brings in a lot of money. Obviously, the characters accomplished that back in the 80s too, but for the films, introducing Brittany, Jeanette, and Eleanor was really the only way to go after the first one. Not to mention they were obviously heavily present in the marketing, promotional material, and a whole lot of merchandise. Let's see, what else? There was a moment in the trailer when the Chipettes had joined the cheerleading squad. I wish we could have seen that as a deleted scene. That's really all I have to say about them. Oh, I guess we also have them to thank for the millions of repitched covers of modern female pop songs that you can find all over YouTube. Okay, let's move on. So, finally getting into the plot of the film, as well as some pros and cons about it. There's quite a lot to say, and I won't have time to cover absolutely everything. First off, I like how the film shows the challenges that Alvin, Simon, and Theodore have to face figuring out a lot of things on their own, because Dave gets hospitalized after being knocked into an amplifier at a concert. Ouch. And their figurative safety net, and the person they rely on the most, is removed from their lives until he recovers. This makes it all the more stressful for them when he's not there to see them leave for their first day of school. And because Dave's Aunt Jackie was severely injured right as the Chipmunks arrived back in LA, they're left in the care of her 20-something-year-old grandson Toby, who isn't that responsible. I know I just explained the first 10 minutes of the movie, but this sets up a classic situation with a lot of story potential. It creates a sense of unfamiliarity or fish out of water to the characters, and as the audience, we're supposed to feel, oh, how are they going to get out of this one when they don't know what to do or have the thing we expect them to use to get out of it? This way, the characters not only have to learn from experience, but they are at greater risk of facing consequences. Since this is Alvin and the Chipmunks, though, and the events of this film are mostly self-contained, the consequences aren't too big, and I guess that could be seen as a flaw, but the biggest problem with the Squeakuel that I would be inclined to agree with critics on is the sheer number of plot lines. On top of the previous situation, the Chipmunks also have to contend with bullies, and their arch-nemesis from the first film, who's back with new competition for them, the aforementioned Chipettes, and steal their popularity. If that wasn't enough, the goal leading to the end of the film is to win a music competition against other schools and win $25,000 to save West Eastman's music program. That's a pretty big one, but probably even more important is Alvin's ego driving a wedge between him and his brothers, which actually does serve the overall message of the film, which I'll get to soon enough. So yeah, that's a lot of plot lines. Oh, and I guess there's also Toby having a crush on this one girl at the school who now teaches there as the Chipmunks' music teacher, although that really doesn't affect much. To be fair, the first film felt like it had this same problem too, with too many plot lines, and in this case it could have been a lot worse. It's kind of like a double-edged sword here. It shows how challenging their normal civilized lives can be, especially in this circumstance, but the conflicts are closer to their own level. By that, I mean how Chipwrecked relied more on external conflicts, particularly man, or chipmunk, versus nature, which made the characters even more out of their element and less in control of the situation, going back to what I was saying about the first 10 minutes of the Squeakuel. But this obviously isn't a retrospective on Chipwrecked, so I'll just skip to the point. I'm not saying that the best Alvin and the Chipmunks conflicts or plot lines are the non-civilized, high-stakes, actiony ones. In fact, those too are prone to failure. But with something like school, which already has a wide range of conflicts, and this film has a big focus around that, along with everything else I mentioned, well, it just seems like there was too much to manage at once. It was a pretty full plate. Now let's get to the life lesson that I hope you all picked up on when you first saw the movie, or at least before I point it out now. The most impactful of the many plot lines this film has, in my opinion, has to be the disagreement with Alvin and Simon, with Theodore being caught in the middle. It's more the disagreement part that actually hits close to home for me. Growing up, and even now, I'm a lot like Simon. My younger brother used to basically be Alvin in that he really annoyed me at times, though our disagreements were never really comparable to the situation from the Squeakuel. Neither of us strived for fame, okay, so I guess my brother isn't really like Alvin in that regard. You really can't blame Alvin for his ambition to become the most popular guy, or chipmunk, in school, hanging out with the jocks and even joining the West Eastman football team. Not only does Simon think Alvin is hanging out with a bad crowd, but it also causes them to argue about Alvin's prior commitments, his brothers, and the music competition. Because they're competing in a sing-off against the Chipettes to represent West Eastman for the even bigger sing-off, Alvin can't afford to miss it. The only problem is he has a football match on the same day. The match finishes right before the sing-off, but what does Alvin do? He gets so enveloped in the fame that he forgets to go to the sing-off in favor of going to the victory party, and as a result, Simon and Theodore have to forfeit. Of course, this ends up not mattering anyway, since the Chipettes aren't able to make it to the bigger sing-off at first and need to be rescued, but the conflict is paid off before then when Theodore gets saved from an eagle at the zoo, and Alvin admits that he should have been there with his brothers more. If this isn't getting through to you, I'll just spell it out. The main lesson of the film, which affects both the Chipmunks and the Chipettes, is that family is more important than fame. Brittany already knows that when she tries to stand up for Jeanette and Eleanor, but Alvin learns it through experience. He gets his fame at first, albeit only on a school football team level, but realizes that he let down his family, which is made even more impactful since, again, Dave is temporarily out of the picture, and the only ones he has left are his brothers. Yes, I know Toby was there too, and he's family, but come on, what advice would he have given? So, while the plot of the Squeakuel is complicated, I overall thought it was a better film than the first one. Chipwrecked and Road Chip still found ways to improve, but if there's one thing this film really succeeds at, it's the life lesson. Before I conclude, I have two little unnecessary things to mention about the movie. One's a piece of trivia, and the other is more of a comment. First, the real-life filming location for West Eastman High School was actually Wilson High School in Long Beach, California. 2, I can actually relate to Theodore's interest in Meerkat Manor. I used to watch Animal Planet all the time as a kid, and I was probably one of the few audience members at my age at the time the Squeakuel came out who actually had watched or heard of that show. With all that said, I hope that you enjoyed this trip down memory lane. It took me quite a while to plan out and write this thoroughly. You should expect to hear from me again in mid to late January with more elaborations and a few other surprises, assuming that Kappa doesn't bring about the end of this channel. Anyways, happy holidays everyone, and thanks for listening.